Single dad Ethan Walker and his daughter Lily stood awkwardly in first class, his worn backpack clashing sharply with the plush leather seats and expensive champagne flutes. CEO Victoria Hale in 1A watched him fumble, a frown deepening, and let out a small, sharp laugh. "Economy brings the surprises," Victoria murmured. Ethan flushed, apologized, and settled Lily near the back. Lily whispered, terrified, "I'm sorry I made you embarrassed, Daddy. It felt like they were pointing at us." As the plane began its heavy taxi, the PA system crackled violently and cut out entirely. The cockpit fell into a profound, terrifying silence. Ethan Walker, 36, was a man of deliberate choice. He had consciously traded the life of a hero for the life of a father. His current title, Civilian Maintenance Technician, was a deliberate downgrade from his past. He had once been an elite field paramedic, highly decorated for service in volatile, remote areas, often operating within the golden hour of trauma. He left that world 3 years ago, following a traumatic, near-fatal transport accident that had shaken his faith in chaos and exposed him to the unforgiving reality of a failure loop. He carried the ghosts of that era, not images of violence, but the persistent hum of monitors flatlining, the smell of sterile metal mixed with ozone, and the specific anxiety of being responsible for life in an unstable environment. Now his only mission was providing absolute stability for his daughter, 7-year-old Lily. He sought routine, silence, and predictable mechanics. Their life was a meticulously planned sequence of economies. This midday flight was the cheapest, a necessary evil to visit his ailing mother, allowing him to save on overnight accommodation. His backpack was worn, but meticulously organized. It contained a well-loved comic book, The Adventures of Astra, the Quiet Engineer, a thermos of warm tea, and a compact professional-grade medical trauma kit, a habit he could not break. His quiet demeanor wasn't meekness. It was a deeply ingrained discipline, a way to minimize his own sensory footprint for the sake of Lily's nervous system. The loud laughter from first class was precisely the type of unpredictable sensory event he worked hardest to shield her from. Lily was hypersensitive to noise and tension. The gentle laughter directed at her father was instantly felt, magnifying her natural anxiety about the unfamiliar aircraft sounds. Her whispered apology was a small, sharp injury to Ethan's heart. He smoothed her hair, guiding her to their cramped, windowless seat near the rear galley. He noticed the thin, almost imperceptible film of dust on the overhead bin, a subtle sign of rushed maintenance that only a hyper-observant technician would catch. He filed the detail away, an unnecessary data point in his constant environmental scan. Meanwhile, Victoria Hale, 43, was the very definition of modern privilege. As CEO of Vectra Capital, a high-frequency trading firm, she viewed the world in terms of performance metrics and access tiers. First class was her natural habitat, a zone of silence, efficiency, and unwavering respect. To her, Ethan was a disorder, an element of crowd that had mistakenly breached her protected space. She valued hierarchy because it meant predictability, and predictability was the cornerstone of her billion-dollar career. Disorder in the cabin implied disorder in the company's metrics, an unacceptable risk. She found the discomfort of low-fare travelers amusing, a confirmation of her own successful choices. Her contempt was not personal, it was institutional. If you cannot manage your own logistics, she'd often preach, you cannot manage complexity. She found the small delays and the fumbling passenger profoundly irritating as they impinged on the precious, finite resource of her time. The flight attendant, Sarah, a nervous woman in her late 20s, felt the crushing weight of Victoria's silent expectation. Serving high-value clients meant anticipating their demands, and Victoria's demand for order was always paramount. She had silently approved of Ethan's retreat, prioritizing the comfort of the few who paid the most. As Ethan settled Lily, he pulled out her small, battered notebook. He used a technique from his field days, grounding through detail. "Look, sweetie, you see that tiny scratch on the window frame?" he murmured, pointing. "Someone probably hit it with a coffee cup. It's just a little mark. It doesn't affect the metal's integrity. Nothing to worry about." He then pulled out the Astra comic, a story about an engineer who fixes problems by listening patiently to the machine. He offered a final, quiet teaching moment, meant to steel her against the world's cruelties. Dignity isn't what they give you, Lils. It's what you keep when they try to take it. Remember that. Their laughter doesn't make us better or worse. It's just noise, and we don't run on noise. We run on focus. He taught her this principle. Never meet judgment with confrontation. Meet it with competence. This was the core ethos of his past life. The mission was always the priority. But even Ethan, with his disciplined calm, felt a sudden, familiar tension in the aircraft's hum. It was a subtle deviation, a grinding note in the engine's song that sounded less like pure power and more like internal friction. He could identify the phase distortion in the engine's rotation from the frequency of the drone. He closed his eyes, instantly profiling the noise. The past he tried to bury was about to become the present he couldn't ignore. The scent of ozone was becoming slightly stronger. This was not cosmetic. This was systemic. The plane completed its takeoff roll with unusual sluggishness, the climb feeling heavy and slightly unbalanced. The cabin lighting flickered momentarily, causing a collective intake of breath. Ethan remained highly alert, his focus now locked on the mechanical sound, not Lily's breathing. He confirmed the faint metallic scent, ozone, the sharp smell of electrical components beginning to break down. He profiled the vibration, a high-frequency, low-amplitude shudder that suggested a bearing failure in a non-critical but heavily utilized system, likely hydraulic or auxiliary power. In first class, the initial smooth glide was interrupted by a jarring, rhythmic vibration. It wasn't turbulence. It felt structural, deeply rooted in the aircraft's frame. The CEO in 1A, Victoria Hale, had just received an email confirming a merger deal closure, but the joy was instantly swallowed by anxiety. Her control was external. On this plane, she was just cargo. Henderson, a gentleman seated in 2B, suddenly clutched his chest, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "I'm dizzy," he gasped, his breathing shallow and rapid. "I need air." His distress was compounded by the sudden feeling of the plane being unstable. Flight attendant Sarah rushed to his side. She tried the service phone. Dead, no dial tone. She tried the main intercom override. Only static, the sound of a broken circuit. The comm system was down. She looked towards the cockpit door, helpless, her own panic rising because her primary tool, communication, was gone. The pressure gauge in the galley was also blank. Victoria ripped her noise-canceling headphones off. She wasn't just annoyed, she was frightened. The loss of communication was a direct violation of her required predictability. "What is the problem?" she demanded, her voice sharp and brittle. "Call the captain immediately. This is unacceptable." Sarah's hands were shaking. "Ms. Hale, I am trying." "We appear to have an internal communications failure. We are unable to contact the flight deck. Please, everyone, remain calm." The cabin was no longer merely restless. Fear was palpable. Whispers of, "What's going on?" and "Is it an engine?" traveled through the air. Children began to cry. Ethan, meanwhile, noticed Lily's breathing accelerating. The change in the aircraft's sound, the rising panic, the electrical smell, it was overwhelming her. He immediately applied his old field medic trick, tactical breathing. He placed his hand firmly on her diaphragm. "Breathe with Dad, Lils. 4 counts in. Hold for 1. 4 counts out. Feel my hand move. The noise is just outside. We are safe inside this box." The focus, controlled action brought her heart rate down immediately, preventing a full panic attack. Just as Lily stabilized, the vibration intensified, a sharp, grinding note resonating through the floor. A passenger across the aisle, Mr. Johnson, groaned loudly and slipped sideways, hitting the floor with a sickening thud. He was completely unresponsive. The sight of the unconscious man triggered chaos. Sarah shrieked, fumbling for the standard first aid kit, a box filled mostly with plasters, aspirin, and generic motion sickness tablets. She was trained in CPR, but not in high-stress differential diagnosis. Ethan acted on instinct. He was out of his seat and kneeling beside the man before Sarah could block him. His hands, previously mocked for being rough, were steady, moving with the economy of a surgeon. He checked for pulse, present but thready. He checked for airway, compromised by a partially swallowed tongue. "I am a licensed paramedic, retired field specialist. Stand back." He's unresponsive but breathing shallowly. Head tilt, chin lift, checking airway now. Ethan's voice was the only note of calm in the storm, instantly cutting through the hysteria. Victoria, seeing a stranger touching a first-class passenger, lost all professional sense and saw only liability. "You stop! This is highly inappropriate. You are an unlicensed civilian, and this man is in first class. We have medical staff on standby, not some technician from the back. Do you even know the procedures? This is a criminal act if you touch him without consent." Sarah hesitated, her training screaming protocol and lawsuit, her intuition screaming someone is dying. "Sir, I must ask you to wait. The captain needs to approve all aid." "The captain can't approve anything," Ethan countered, his eyes locked on Mr. Johnson's struggling airway. "The cockpit is silent, no comms. And if you wait for approval, he'll choke on his own tongue due to a hypoxic episode compounded by low cabin oxygen. We are past procedure now, its consequence." He gently, firmly moved Sarah aside. He stabilized the man, using a small, specialized laryngoscope from his trauma kit, something no civilian would carry, to confirm the airway obstruction was clearing. His oxygen saturation reader, pulled from the same kit, confirmed his diagnosis. Severe hypoxia in vagal response. The man was collapsing due to the stress and the sudden drop in breathable air quality, which Ethan realized was tied to the electrical failure. The grinding, rhythmic, structural vibration was increasing, and the cabin was getting noticeably colder. Ethan knew he had stabilized the man temporarily, but the core issue was the failing aircraft systems. He could save one man, but not 200. He needed to be listened to immediately. He knew the first aid kit was useless for the current threat level. He rose, his 6-foot frame radiating an authority that eclipsed Victoria's wealth and status entirely. His focus shifted from medicine to mechanics. The time pressure was not only medical, but aerodynamic. Ethan ignored Victoria entirely. Her legal threats were drowned out by the metallic grinding from below. His focus was laser sharp. Locate the source of the electrical failure and the resulting hydraulic system strain. Twist 1. The revelation, field specialist and engineer. "Sarah, listen carefully," Ethan commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a field commander. "The power failure is tied to the main communication bus, but the oscillation is mechanical. The smell is hydraulic fluid overheating. We have a severe vibration in the central fuselage frame caused by an overloaded hydraulic pump, likely the primary aileron actuator. When the comms failed, the system failed to throttle back, and it's now self-destructing." He pointed to a specific access panel in the forward galley, an area only visible to the crew. "The main circuit failure is temporary, but the comms link has an auxiliary power input, a redundant system installed years ago, designed specifically for this model's early life failure rate. It's behind that panel, the one near the emergency oxygen tank, slightly above the floor line." Sarah looked at the smooth, unmarked wall panel. She knew that area was classified as crew-only storage. "Sir, I don't know what you mean. There is no official access panel there." Ethan narrowed his eyes, his voice becoming dangerously low. "Yes, there is. A 3-bolt, customized access panel. It was installed during the Phoenix 2 refit in Tucson 4 years ago. I know the schematics because I signed off on the power redundancy design. There is a reset switch there marked OCOM R5. You must press that button for 5 seconds. It forces the secondary battery bus to jump the comms relay. Do it now, or we lose flight control permanently." Victoria scoffed from her seat, still clinging desperately to her authority. "This is insane. He's just guessing. He's a maintenance tech, not an avionics specialist." "Stop him, Sarah. You are risking everyone's safety on a guess." Sarah, now terrified but completely convinced by the sheer specificity of the man, ignored Victoria completely. The detail about the 3-bolt, customized access panel, and the Phoenix 2 refit was impossible for a regular passenger to know. She felt for the faint seam of the panel. Her fingers found the magnetic latch. It popped open with a small metallic snick. Inside, bathed in the glow of the cabin light, was a simple red button and a small labeled dial, exactly as Ethan described. She pressed the red button hard. Ksast! The intercom exploded back to life with a blast of static, followed by a clear but strained voice from the cockpit. Cabin, this is Captain Thompson. We are operational again. We had a complete, inexplicable co-MMs and main power loss. Who reset the R5 relay? Identify yourself. Ethan stepped forward, resting one hand on the cockpit doorframe. Captain Thompson, this is Ethan Walker. I was the field consultant who retrofitted the R5 module during the Phoenix 2 refit 4 years ago. The R5 relay reset should stabilize the internal comms, but your main bus fluctuation is tied to the aileron hydraulic pump actuator. I'm getting a high-frequency vibration signal through the floor. Check your system output. If the aileron actuator's fluid pressure is spiking above 80%, you need to manually throttle the hydraulic intake flow to 60% for exactly 30 seconds using the secondary relief valve. That will clear the thermal stress before the pump shears. The captain took a sharp breath, audible through the microphone. Walker, stand by. Checking diagnostic now. Confirming pressure spike at 92%. We are executing your protocol. The entire first-class cabin, including Victoria Hale, gasped as one. They were listening to a passenger, the man they had just mocked, diagnose a catastrophic technical fault with impossible precision. They heard the subtle mechanical sound shift, the high-frequency grind easing, replaced by a smooth, normal hum. The captain's voice returned, stronger, laced with awe and relief. Executed, Walker. The fluctuation is clearing. We are stable. 30 years I've been flying, and I've never seen that specific failure mode fixed so fast or diagnosed remotely. Thank you. Twist 2, emotional retribution. The captain's voice returned a moment later, his tone shifting from professional relief to profound, emotional gravity. His message was directed not at air traffic control, but at the passengers who were now breathing easy because of a single man. Ladies and gentlemen, I need to make a final, critical announcement. We owe our lives to a passenger on this flight. We had a cascading failure that would have forced a dangerous emergency landing and risked a complete loss of control. The man who resolved the medical emergency of our fellow passenger, Mr. Johnson, who is now stable, and who then diagnosed and provided the exact successful step-by-step technical instruction to save this aircraft's hydraulic system, is seated in economy with his daughter. The captain paused for dramatic effect, letting the weight of the moment settle. His name is former Air Med Rescue Field Specialist Ethan Walker. He is the engineer who designed the very safety feature that just saved us. Mr. Walker, you saved this flight, and you saved every single person on board. I am personally recommending you for the highest commendation our airline can give. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and agonizing. It was the sound of overwhelming, universal shame and stunned realization. Victoria Hale, the CEO, felt the heat of the cabin air, despite the cooling. Her cruel, dismissive joke, "Economy really brings the surprises," reverberated in her mind, amplified by the captain's praise. She had not only laughed at the man who saved her, but she had actively and vehemently tried to block him from doing so, citing protocol and liability. Her status, her wealth, her first-class seat, all of it was irrelevant, a joke. The moral inversion was complete. She was the foolish, arrogant figure. Ethan Walker was the essential man, the only person with the knowledge, the calm, and the courage to act. Ethan simply checked the revived passenger one last time, ensuring Mr. Johnson's breathing was deep and stable, his job complete. He turned toward the back of the plane. He did not look at Victoria. He didn't need to. The total, crushing humiliation in the cabin was his victory, a quiet victory of competence over prejudice. The wave of shame in first class was quickly replaced by a desperate need for acknowledgement and correction. Passengers turned in their seats, their faces etched with guilt and dawning admiration. Flight attendant Sarah approached Ethan, tears welling in her eyes, carrying a fresh bottle of cold water, not the usual champagne. She lowered her voice, offering a public, heartfelt apology. "Mr. Walker, I am so sorry for the seating, for my hesitation, for the protocols I should have discarded, and for not trusting you. I let the pressure from the front dictate my actions. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart, you saved my career and everyone's lives." Ethan nodded kindly, accepting the water but not the worship. "You were just trying to keep order, Sarah. The system is designed to reward conformity. It takes courage to break the rules when lives are on the line. You did it when it mattered." Victoria Hale stood up. Her movements, usually sharp and decisive, were slow, heavy with a new kind of awareness. She approached Ethan as he walked toward his daughter. Her apology was no longer about saving face, it was about reclaiming her own moral integrity. "Mr. Walker," her voice trembled slightly, lacking its usual boardroom steel. "I need you to know my comment was unforgivable. I judged your worth based on your seat number and your appearance. I believe silence and status were more important than an urgent intervention. You have just demonstrated that the quietest person in the room often holds the most necessary skill. I mistook my privileges for my skills, and that mistake almost cost me everything. I apologize to you, and I apologize to Lily. There is no defense for my arrogance." Ethan looked at her. He saw genuine, raw humility, not corporate maneuvering. He simply gave a slow, respectful nod of acceptance. He didn't need to forgive her entirely. He only needed her to see the truth, and she clearly did. He didn't want a confrontation. He wanted peace for Lily. He knelt by Lily, who was now watching the exchange with wide, calm eyes. The commotion had not terrified her. It had illuminated her father, transforming him from a quiet technician into a silent, capable hero. The captain emerged one final time, stepping into the aisle. He bypassed every first-class seat and stood before Ethan, offering his hand in a firm, equal grip. "Mr. Walker, the flight deck needs a full report on the power bus anomaly. We are requesting your presence, not as a guest, but as an active consultant for the remainder of the flight. Your insight is crucial to the safety of our remaining flight time. This is not a request. This is an invitation of partnership." It was the ultimate form of respect, a request for his expertise, not a gift of luxury. Ethan accepted, handing Lily's care over to Sarah, who now treated the girl like precious cargo. As he walked past the rows, the cabin was utterly transformed. The passengers offered sincere nods, quiet whispers of "thank you" and genuine respect. They intuitively understood that the true hierarchy was one of competence, not capital. Lily, resting securely in the flight attendant's grasp, looked up at her father with total, unwavering pride. Her initial shame, caused by Victoria's fleeting laugh, was erased. Her father was the protector, the expert, the man who quietly commanded the world when it fell apart. The cabin settled into a new, profound silence, a silence of respect, not of entitlement. Every passenger was a student of the essential man in the rear. The plane touched down with a smooth, almost silent landing. After a detailed professional debriefing in the cockpit, where Ethan provided diagrams and failure analysis, he rejoined Lily. They were the last to disembark, moving through an empty, quiet cabin. Victoria Hale was waiting near the exit ramp. She was alone, having instructed her colleague to leave. She looked smaller, her expensive clothes suddenly irrelevant against the backdrop of the aircraft's functional life-saving mechanics. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice softer than before, devoid of ambition, "I took the liberty of contacting my office. I've arranged for a trust fund to cover a full tuition scholarship for Lily, from primary education through university. It is completely anonymous and non-reciprocal. This is not payment. It is a genuine attempt to show that my company's resources can, at least today, fund true, quiet value." Ethan paused, looking at the woman who had learned the hardest lesson of her life in the span of an hour. He recognized the sincerity this time. He couldn't reject the security for Lily, but he couldn't accept the reward. Ms. Hale, I appreciate the sincerity of the gesture, he said, but my life's work is teaching Lily that true value is internal. I cannot let money erase the dignity you tried to take, and then gave back. My service today was not for sale or compensation. It was survival. I will not accept a trust fund for saving your life. I have to decline. Victoria blinked, accepting his rejection as another, even deeper layer of his lesson. Her money was useless here. Then what is the payment? How do I make this right? I need to know how to fix this for my conscience. Ethan smiled, a brief, genuine expression. He pointed to Lily, who was standing slightly behind his leg, holding her Astra comic. There is one thing you can do. The only payment I require is that final lesson. You need to apologize to my daughter one last time, without offering anything in return. Victoria knelt down immediately, her silk suit bunching uncomfortably. She met Lily's eyes, which were clear and unafraid. Lily, Victoria said sincerely, your father is the most valuable person I have ever met. I laughed at him because I was foolish. I believed the section of the plane we sat in defined our worth. I was dangerously wrong, and I apologize for causing you distress. Please forgive my laughter, and never ever let anyone tell you that your father's worth is measured by his chair or his clothes. Lily, clutching her comic, nodded. It's okay, she said softly. Daddy says noise doesn't run us. Ethan led Lily away, walking toward the arrivals hall, a quiet man resuming his quiet life. The dramatic incident was already fading into the technical logbooks, a successful anomaly resolution credited to the pilot's quick thinking, and a footnote on the R5 module's efficacy. But for Victoria Hale, the flight would be an enduring legacy. She watched the father and daughter disappear into the crowd. She walked the deserted first-class aisle, touching the seat where she had sat, remembering the cheap joke that had almost cost her life. She realized that the greatest power she had ever wielded was not in the takeover of a competitor, but in the power to apologize without condition. She realized that arrogance was a fatal liability, and that humility, as Ethan had said, was the only true insurance. Her perspective, unlike the aircraft, was permanently recalibrated. The next time she saw a struggling father, her response would not be a snicker, but a moment of respectful, essential silence. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to Single Dad Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.